Hi, I'm Coy Barefoot, and welcome to Inside Charlottesville. Earlier this month, the United States Supreme Court ruled that it is not unconstitutional to collect DNA samples from those individuals who've been arrested and are currently being held in custody. My guest is Albemarle County Sheriff Chip Harding. He is one of the nation's leaders when it comes to just this type of effort, collecting DNA and using that to solve crimes. Sheriff, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So what do you make of this historic decision?
Well, I'm very pleased with it. I think that the court got it right. I've been advocating for years that we need to expand our data bank and start taking samples from convicted misdemeanors. Now, when you look at what occurred in Maryland, that was a felony offense the person had been arrested for. We have similar laws in Virginia on certain serious felonies. We can take DNA upon arrest. It's kind of known nationally as Katie's Law. Actually, I was in Congress a couple of years ago with Katie's mom testifying on this very law in Congress, and it expedites getting someone's sample checked against the data bank to see if they've committed any other offense. But it's only right now for serious offenses. I'm excited because I think that Justice Kennedy, in representing the majority, said that the majority felt like taking a DNA sample is no different than taking your photograph or physical fingerprint.
But when you're arrested now, even if you're not guilty, they take your fingerprint, they take your picture.
And your photograph.
And now they will just take your DNA as well.
Well, the
Is
laws,
that how it works?
well, the laws in Virginia haven't been changed, and actually New York State just went to misdemeanors last year, and I just finished writing a position paper on this a few weeks before this came out, so it was very timely for me. I looked at the sky and said, Lord, you must want this to happen.
Yeah. Now, you've been out in the vanguard on this, Sheriff, for a long time, for years, traveling around the country and here in Virginia, telling people this is a good thing. This will help us solve crimes. It will also help exonerate people.
Free the innocent.
And free the innocent, and
Correct.
we've seen that happen. But there's been some pushback, right?
Sure, and there should be. We should always be very careful anytime we're going to do anything that's intrusive. If somebody's going to give up what they perceive to be a liberty, we need to be very careful and see if the causation is worthwhile to the general public. In this case, I think taking a Q-tip and going inside the mouth, and what I'm advocating is for convicted misdemeanors, going inside the mouth with a Q-tip and putting that sample in with your regular fingerprints and photograph is not very intrusive when I know how much crime it can solve and how much faster we can incapacitate serial predators. And I've looked at cases here locally that I worked on. A couple of the most infamous serial rapists that we had in Charlottesville had previous misdemeanor convictions. And if the legislation had been in fact been in place at the time, we wouldn't have seen all the victims.
We would have
It'd
gotten
been one victim
before
as soon as we
other
had
crimes occurred.
As soon as there was a DNA profile, it would have matched that misdemeanor profile that was in the data bank if we could have done it, and we would have arrested them for the very first rape. You know, the Charlottesville rapists may never have raped in Charlottesville. Shannon Malnowski, who raped 3 women, the second one I personally interviewed was an 85-year-old woman he drug in the bushes near Culver Theater in the middle of the day and raped. That rape of that woman never would have happened if we'd taken DNA from him back when he was convicted of a misdemeanor a few years before that, because we'd arrested him on a rape of a UVA student. That was a couple of years before he raped the elderly woman. So I think the intrusive nature of me taking a swab from your mouth, keeping an 85-year-old woman from being raped, is it worth it? To me, very much so, it's worth it.
Yeah. Are we going to get to the point, you think, where newborns are just swabbed? Where a newborn in America, we just take a DNA sample and it's on file somewhere, just like a Social Security number?
Well, I don't think we're going to get to that point in my lifetime. If you're asking me to speculate for the future within 100 years, I think that DNA, the technology, is so useful. I personally think we're going to get to that point. And when I went door to door in 2007, my wife and I knocked on about 7,000 doors. You know, I did not find one person that didn't pretty much say, well, why don't we just take it at birth? Because if you haven't done anything wrong, why worry? Well, you still got to worry. I mean, I agree with John Whitehead and the Rutherford Institute, the ACLU, and my buddy professor of the University of Virginia, that we still have to be concerned and have safeguards in place.
That concern is your responsibility as a free citizen.
Right. And we need to be concerned about our government and making sure that there are checks and balances.
Right,
you know,
right,
I
right.
appreciate the ACLU and the Rutherford Institute and Brandon Garrett at the university
yeah.
looking at these issues, because there needs to be a balance. And I think every time we want to bring forth a new initiative and claim, like I am in this case, that expanding this data bank is worth what you're giving up in order to do it. And the fact we've had safeguards in place in Virginia, and the data bank, you know, the data bank's been there since '89, the first in the nation. It's been almost a quarter of a century, and it's never been compromised because it's got laws in place to keep it from being compromised. I think it's worth it. I think this initiative is worth it. Now, you might bring me something else that I would agree with them. Well, it's not worth it. It's more intrusive than what we're going to get out of it. This one, I think, is a no-brainer. I mean, I think it's well worth the little bit we're going to give up.
What about those who say, yes, this can be used to solve crimes in ways that make fingerprints and mugshots look like, you know, 19th century technology, which it is, I guess. But there's so much more information that is actually there in our DNA.
Well, there is, Coy, but the way the data bank works is they process at Q-tip. Now, they do save a part of that. It's an unprocessed saliva, so you could get a DNA profile from it. That's locked in a safe. It's all kinds of legislation protections on it. Your actual DNA then looks like a barcode, and it goes into a computer that's also protected. And there's very limited access to that computer. And when we are working on a homicide or a rape or whatever and get a profile from a crime scene and send it down, they make a, you know, they do the profile analysis, run it against the data bank, and it hits in the computer. They then go get the original sample, retest it, and make sure it's accurate. Then we also, if you or the suspect approach you with a search warrant, take your sample again, check it one more time, and an extra sample for your defense attorney so he could have it checked to make sure nobody here is making a mistake.
Yeah.
So the only concern could be, is somebody going to break into that safe and figure out whose sample is which, have it tested, and do something with it? You know, could
and what information might be in someone's DNA that 50, 100 years from now, we can't read yet, but they will be able to.
Forecast, you know, a medical event that's coming up, or
right.
I was asked the other day, how do we know we couldn't forecast who may or may not be a criminal in the future? I don't know. I mean, I don't know where technology is going to take us, but I do know if you can trust your government enough to know, and we have eyes watching, like we've talked about with the ACLU
checks
and whatnot,
balances,
right, and we have legislation in place. You know, we'd be paralyzed if we don't have some faith in our government, and some faith that after we've gone a quarter of a century and you can't find one time there's been a compromise of the data bank, that it's not worth moving forward and expanding it.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything you do. Chip Harding, he is sheriff of Albemarle County and one of the nation's leaders on the use of DNA to solve crimes and to free the innocent. Coming up, we'll talk with Rodney Thomas of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, the very latest on the proposed Route 29 bypass. I'm Coy Barefoot. You're watching Inside Charlottesville.